Okay, Prof, that's looking good. It's coming through nicely.
Okay, that's good. So can I just stop it then for now?
Yes, and when you're on, you can put it on full screen presentation, but it's coming clear through on our side. Thank you.
Good morning, Priven. Priven, as usual, have we tested Portuguese interpretation to see whether Antonio is energetic today?
We have set it up, but we haven't tested. Antonio, do you want to go for a quick sound check? Morning, Antonio.
Good. How are you, Antonio? Bom dia. Bien, todo bien. Good.
Good morning, Antonio. Good to hear you.
Yeah, good energy, good energy, good
loud
energy.
Loud and clear. Wonderful.
Yes. So should we start? I think we can start now. Sabino, are you ready?
Charles, do you want to just introduce Sabino? And then we can
yes, by the way. Morning, colleagues. Maybe Sabino, for now, you can put your own, just for a few minutes for us to introduce you, then can hand over the chairperson to you.
Okay.
Colleagues,
Mr. Shukunda.
Can you meet Sabino, who is the reference group member of Angola? Sabino did a wonderful job for us. English. Sabino did wonderful for us. We were struggling to get into Angola, but Sabino was very handy. He managed to recruit people for this course. This is why we have that large number of people registered for the course. So thank you so much for the work that you've done, Sabino, and we hope you are going to continue supporting colleagues from Angola with the course. I also understand that you have got a youngster or two youngsters who will be helping you. But for now, I'm going to hand over to you so that you can share this session. Over to you. You can also add a little bit of introductions so that people get to know you better. Thank you very much. Over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Shikunda. Thank you, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today. We have been so long waiting for this webinar course. Unfortunately, I'm just joining you today because of the agenda. I had to come to Spain and Portugal for another program. But I'm so happy that today I can join you and let's say conduct this webinar course, this session of today. My name is Sabino do Nascimento. I'm from Angola. I'm a lecturer at the University Agostinho Neto at School of Humanity, Agostinho Neto University. And I'm also working for the Ministry of Higher Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation in Angola, where I'm part of the National Institute of Evaluation and Accreditation. So allow me then to do a very short introduction about the program today. For the course webinar topic was suggested assessment of ESD, significant learning, assessment of education for sustainable development, significant learning. And to lead this session, we count on Professor Overson Shumba. We were also expecting to have Dr. Caleb Mandikonsa, but unfortunately, due to some circumstances, today is not joining us, but we will count on his intervention in next opportunity. So we'll also stay with us. We'll also speak to us, Miss Shanu Miser. Let me say that normally the program has common takes 1.5 hours, and today it will be in the same way. It will not be different today. So for the two panelists, for the two speakers, we will have around half an hour each. And at the end of the program, we will have our question and answer session. So to start with the first intervention, allow me to introduce the first panelist. Let's say I'm going to introduce you, Professor Overson Shumba. Professor Shumba is a lecturer of science education in the Capabel University in Zambia. Let's say that we are counting with a professor from Zambia who teaches science of education and is at the same time the director for the Center of Academic Development at this same university. He is the reference group member for the Sustainability Starts with Teachers in Zambia. Let's say that Professor Shumba is a member of the National Working Group for the country initiative on ESD for 2030 during the United Nations Decade for Education for Sustainable Development. He served as a member of the UNESCO Monitoring and Evaluation Expert Group. So we have here a very short resume of Mr. Overson, of Professor Overson Shumba, who is the first speaker, the first panelist of the course of the session today. So welcome, Professor. Take your place and lead the session, please. Hello, Professor.
Yes.
Professor Shumba is in line.
Hello, Sabino. Good morning.
Good morning, dear Professor Shumba. Nice to
Yes,
hear from you.
Thank you. Let
Welcome,
me just share screen
Professor.
before we start.
Yes.
Do we have my screen there?
Yes, we do have. We do have it.
Thank you very much. First of all, I need to thank you, Sabino, for the introductions. We really appreciate it, and for your chairing the session. I'm looking forward to it. And it's nice again to be invited to make this presentation to the participants of this very important Education for Sustainable Development initiative. We really appreciate everyone who is making it possible. And it's nice once again to meet colleagues in the program. Thank you very much for the opportunity once again. I'm going to speak on the topic of assessment for significant learning, especially that you are embarking on change projects. And I'm hoping that I can structure my presentation such that we can start with a brief background in which I'll give an example of dimensions of significant learning. Antonio, if I'm speaking too fast, let me know so that I can try to slow down some more for the translation. And the second thing I'll do is to give an example of an innovative activity in assessment for significant learning, which has been initiated by one of the communities of practice, which I'm working with in Zambia. So these are the two items which will structure my presentation. Let me start by making a reflection or a comment about the course itself in terms of what I think it emphasizes. You're going to see that it emphasizes learning actions and knowing and how to do things. It emphasizes that we ought to be working together as communities of practice in order to introduce change. And this change must be permanent for the better. And it must be in some significant aspect in our professional and social lives. And in the final analysis, we see it enhancing this learning as enhancing the possibility to become agents for change. In other words, the course is trying to get us to acquire certain significant learnings which will be lasting and which will help us in trying to create sustainable futures. And I think when you look at learning action number 4, we emphasize assessment for significant learning in that learning action module. And I think the entire course actually challenges us to expect and to assess this significant learning which is taking place among us as community of practice members, as change project participants, and the beneficiaries of those projects. So it is
Apologies,
important
Prof.
that,
Shumba.
yeah.
Prof. Shumba, apologies to interrupt you. Please, some participants are requesting to put your presentation in presentation mode so it can be seen more clear.
It's not showing in presentation mode.
No, it's just on preview. If you go to the bottom.
No, and it's not moving.
Let's see, what am I doing wrong here? Can I stop share and
yes, you can just
again?
go to the, you can also go to the bottom, Prof, and press that third icon that's highlighted that looks like a flip chart at the bottom next to the Zoom.
Let's see.
So at the bottom of your PowerPoint, where it says English on that panel.
The PowerPoint, I'm already on share screen on my computer here, so I'll need to get out first.
Okay. Okay, you can stop share. Apologies. Prof, Zandi is sharing the PowerPoint for you now.
Oh, she is? Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Zandi. Thank you, Prof.
Back.
You may continue, Prof.
Okay, you've got it there. Okay, so I was on this screen where I was trying to make observations about the course itself and trying to get to the point that these points tend to point us towards and to challenge us towards expecting and to assess significant learning which is taking place among all the participants and the community of practice members. And now what we have been doing is to try and demonstrate some examples of what this significant learning might be like. If you could go to the next slide, please. Yes, when you look at, I think you skipped a slide, just go back, there's a slide which you skipped. Okay, this in this slide here, I'm just trying to show one example which shows the dimensions of significant learning. And this is by Dr. L.D. Fink. And we have adopted it and adapted it for use in terms of trying to demonstrate some examples of significant learning. In this particular example, Dr. Fink stresses that there are 6 dimensions of significant learning, which relate to acquiring basic knowledge and understanding, which is foundational knowledge. And of course, the issue of using knowledge and skill to engage in projects, which is application, and trying to make connections among ideas and things, which is integration. And he emphasizes also that we need to learn about ourselves and others and appreciate our personal and societal values, which is the human dimension. And for us on the human dimension, we have also emphasized the importance of the ecological dimension. And so we have adapted this to be the human and ecological dimension. And then we've got the 5th dimension, which is the caring, where we acquire new feelings, interests, and values that reflect caring about something or someone. And so this caring, we thought it is quite important to relate it to values which are found in our communities. For example, we have adopted this and included Ubuntu values as part of this caring dimension. And we have also the 6th dimension, which is learning to learn. And this concerns engaging in inquiry and how to become a self-directed learner. So essentially, according to Dr. D. Fink's model, we are looking at significant learning is comprised of several dimensions, in this case, 6 dimensions. And in the next slide, please go on. In the next slide, if you look at the schematic on the left here, you are going to see that the significant learning itself is in the middle. And we can see these lobes hanging out from there, which are like petals of the flower on the right. We can see the dimensions of significant learning, the foundational knowledge, the application, the integration, the human dimension, the caring, and the learning how to learn. Now, in this case, we can see that in this representation, the dimensions of significant learning are all related. You can see that they are interconnected and is shown in the middle there. And in addition to being related, we can see that they reinforce one another. If you acquire one dimension, you do not quite achieve significant learning. And so it is quite important for these to complement one another, to reinforce one another, as it were. So significant learning is achieved when learning takes place in all dimensions. For example, without foundational knowledge, it may not be possible for you to appreciate the human and the ecological dimensions of the sustainable development issues, and that is quite important. But what is critical in this is that when you look at significant learning, it is about lasting learning outcomes. Just remain there a little bit. It is about lasting learning outcomes. And just get back, Gandhi. Just go back to the last slide. What is important about significant learning is that it is about lasting outcomes which change our lives. And the flower on the right is reflecting that particular connectivity of the various dimensions of learning, as well as hinting to the fact that with maturation, the flower is going to generate new seeds, new fruits and new seeds, and leading to a new generation of plants. And so significant learning is almost like that. And so what I'd like to do here is to give you an example of how one project, the Mekera Beekeeping Educational Forum, which is operating at the Zambia Forestry College in Kitwe in Zambia, how they are looking at assessing significant learning. If you go to the next slide. And in the picture here, you can see the three members of the COP. You can see the three members of the community of practice and some of the beehives which they are creating in order to place in the apiary in the forest, as it were. What they have is this commitment and purpose here. What they have put in the write-up to their presentation is that we are going to, the slide keeps going out to and fro. Let's go to the next one. Let's get to the next slide where we've got the quotations. Right, their commitment is expressed in the statements which are shown there. We are going to test the project if it is sustainable using the 6 connected dimensions of significant learning. We view the significant learning outcomes as being like the petals of flowers to see if the project is able to bear fruits and attain the ESG 2030 project set. And they explained that the purpose is to assess if the learner and the community are able to identify the problem, come up with a solution, apply the knowledge, and able to themselves to do things in a sustainable way. And I think this is indicative of their appreciation of significant learning, that it must enable those who have acquired the various dimensions of learning to do things in a sustainable way. And their change project is attempting to do this. Let's go to the next slide. And what I want to point out before we get to the example of their assessment rubric, I want to highlight what they see as the change project process and how it is comparable to a seed which germinates and grows into a new tree, which then bears new fruit and a new seed, which in turn generate new plants. And so this is quite a good metaphor for what is going to be happening in the change project. So when you look at this germinating seed here, we are going to find that it is starting as a seed and eventually germinating and coming out as a plant with all its different parts. And when they look at the assessment of significant learning, they are using this idea of a germinating seed and the various parts as some of the indicators that significant learning is taking place. And we are going to illustrate this in the rubric which they have created. And what I want to emphasize here is the fact that with assessment for significant learning, it is important for the change project team to be innovative and creative. We do not have what we can call a standard way by which it can be done. But as you realize, we are expecting that people are going to create change projects which are transformative and which bring about permanent changes in their lives. And that is quite important. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, in this slide here, I'm going to explain a little bit about the assessment rubric which they have used. As you realize, with significant learning and the other learning outcomes, including values, we are not going to be able to assess them in the traditional way by using perhaps a paper and a pencil test. We need to be finding alternative ways of assessing the learning outcomes as we go. And so if we are going to assess performances and values, we might need also to make sure that we clarify the indicators which will help us to make those assessments. And so in this case, what they have done is as their criteria, they are using on the left column here, you can see the dimensions of significant learning, which they have identified from that model which I introduced. For example, we can begin with foundational knowledge here and then go to the others later. And then as you go on the right-hand side, the columns there, you've got the performance indicators, which they have defined, and the scores for each level of performance. For example, if it's very good evidence of significance learning, they score that observation is 5 points. If it is good, they score it 4 points. And if it is not yet satisfactory, but emerging, they score it 2 points. So that for each one of these, they will really look out to say, do the community members and the students, are they attaining foundational knowledge? And to what extent are they achieving this? And then they can begin to score. What is important here is that as you define the performance, you need also to be specific about what you are going to see or the evidence you are going to look out for. For example, they've identified this as able to identify, critique, and describe the sustainable development issues. If they are able to do that, the students or the community members or the members of the corp, they scored it as very good. And we can see it graduates to the unsatisfactory, where it is just emerging when they are able to identify but inadequately and incoherently describe the sustainable development issues. And so in this way, they are able to see if there is progress in terms of the transformation. I just want to make one more comment about the same so that you're going to see this in relation to what I talked about their imagery of a germinating seed and then growing. In their innovation, they have identified the parts of the germinating seed, and you can see here the epicotyl, the radicle, the cotyledon, the seed coat, and so forth. And so they are imagining that when they are starting their project, it is like a seed in a seed coat, and it is really going to be needing to start the process of germination. And as it goes, you are going to see that it then begins to shoot, and all its parts as shown in the last slide. And for the other level, for the other dimensions of significant learning, they've also looked, for example, at application. Okay, you skipped. When you look at application, they look at it as the germination of the seed. And the human and ecological dimension, which is now showing, is considered to be like branches of a tree. And we can see here that when significant learning is being achieved in a very good, with very good evidence of it, they are able to care for the human and ecological well-being, and for initiating for the relationship to others locally and globally. And when it's not satisfactory, there is no evidence that such is taking place. And so as you go through this here, we can begin to see that the assessments will need to have criteria or indicators which you can show as evidence of attainment. And also we would like to be able to notice that the evidence must be actually written down so that the participants can even have access to the rubric, and they can be able to see what is desired of them to achieve. And that way they can begin to work towards this kind of learning dimensions. Let's go on to the next one. I just like to share what they have found in their attempts to assess their community of practice and their students. In this case, I'm showing the overall assessment of significant learning in the project using their kind of rubric as I've tried to show. For foundational knowledge, they've identified that the community members and students are scoring an average of 12 points, which translates to 85.7%. And learning to learn is also shown to be evident, and it is scored 85.7%. And as we go down, they've scored the other dimensions of learning. And in the final analysis, we can see that the dimensions which have got the lowest kind of rating are those associated with caring or Ubuntu, and those associated with application. Of course, this is something which they are still working on. We don't know exactly why this would be the case, but the most important thing is they are beginning to use their rubric in order to understand whether this kind of learning which they desire is taking place in their students as well as in the members of the community whom they are cooperating with. Okay, so in conclusion, I'll take a conclusion which they came up with. Let's go on to the next slide. In their observation, then, the Mekera Beekeeping Educational Forum, they believe that they are contributing to significant learning in all 6 dimensions, which is evident, obviously, in the apiary, which they've actually instituted in the college forest, and in their work with the community members, and the field trips which are being conducted by learners from the surrounding schools. But what they observe is that it needs to support learners in the application and care in Ubuntu dimensions, and this will be helpful in achieving more holistic learning. And so what we draw from this is the fact that if we are only achieving some dimensions of significant learning and not others, then we do not achieve holistic significant learning. And their idea is they would like to work on these other dimensions in which are not evident in their, which are less evident in their community, and improve upon them. And so I present to you this as an example of how people are experimenting with assessment for significant learning, which is an important contribution to examples which you might find useful when studying the learning action number 4 on assessment. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Shumba, for this brilliant intervention. It was a very, let's say, exciting learning experience. We have been sharing a very good and productive session. During your intervention, Professor, I have underlined very, very strong points. The way you related the ability to become agent of change, the importance of the community of practice in order to carry out a project of change, and by bringing the 6 dimensions of significant learning, you have shared with us some very important issues that, by applying in our new experience, we believe it will be really helpful. Professor Shumba, this metaphor of the flower, of the plant, is really interesting and very pedagogical. It's really related to what we expect as a project for sustainable development. We have taken it into consideration, and I hope we will have a very good moment to interact with you, to still interact with you during the question and answer session. For this moment, I just want to say, Professor Ovasen Shumba, thank you very much for this very productive session and intervention. So,
Thank you, Chair.
oh, thank you, Prof. Now, I'm going to introduce you the next panelist, the next speaker. Her name is Shanu Miser, is the national coordinator of the Fundisa for Change. Yes, she's the national coordinator of the Fundisa for Change. She's also a teacher. It's a national teacher education program, pardon. She's the national coordinator of the Fundisa for Change National Teacher Education Program. The Fundisa for Change program is a multi-stakeholder, collaborative national professional learning community established as a Southern Africa community for practice responsible for enhancing and supporting transformative environmental and sustainability learning through teacher education in the country. She has more than 20 years experience of working in the field of environmental and sustainable development. Let's say the environmental learning. So this is a very quick and short bio of Ms. Shanu Miser, the next speaker of today's session. So allow me to welcome Ms. Shanu. Ms. Shanu, please welcome, take the word, and please conduct the session.
Thank you very much, and good morning, colleagues. Previn, if I can ask you to share my presentation. Thank you. So thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. So I think my presentation today is more of a provocation rather than just a presentation. And it will be a lot of questions being posed, and hopefully people are happy to engage in the chats. So colleagues, what I'm here to discuss with you today, can go to the next slide, is to look at the concept of significant learning and to share some lessons and experiences through the Fundisa for Change program, which we have been working with. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. I think one of the key things for us to think about during this session, next slide, please, is
Shanu, sorry, apologies. Sorry, Shanu.
No problem.
Hi, can you us lower the pace a little bit just to so that our translation can keep up with you? Thank you so much.
Thank you. So one of the things that I would ask the question today is, how is significant learning reflected in this course within this 5-step framework? If one takes the picture of the 5 steps and we reflect on it with your change project being in the center, and we start to think about the idea of significant learning, where does significant learning reflect in the 5 steps? So would it be at step 1? Would it be at step 4? Or is it through the process of undergoing each one of the steps and into the change project that significant learning is foregrounded? Can move to the next slide. So if you look at this, the flower diagram that Prof. Shumba has already introduced and so eloquently provided examples for, and the examples were fantastic, Prof. Thank you for that. It really brought it down to something very practical and something very real. So if we're looking at, in terms of the course itself, and if we reflect on how we engage within the course and how the assessment within this particular course has been set up or established, we'd ask the question then, and it's a point for reflection for everyone as we move and we complete all the different learning actions, is whether through the change project we would have achieved significant learning. And so that's a question for you to reflect on as we move through the course and complete each one of our assessment tasks, and we engage in establishing the change project, is to ask ourselves the question, are we achieving significant learning? And to reflect on the process of how assessment would be taking place on the course, how the assessment activities are actually being set up to be able, and whether those reflect significant learning. So with that question in mind, I will now move on to the next slide. So what I'd like to share with you today is a little bit of insight that we've gained from some of the different work that we have been involved in. So the Fundisa for Change program is a national ESD program within the country, which deals with different ESD topics. So one of the topics that we have been working with, and we've been working with a framework that looks at content knowledge, teaching practices, and assessment practices. And in focusing on content knowledge, quite a lot of attention has been given to the idea of foundational knowledge. In working with the idea of teaching practices, a lot of attention has been given to active learning, critical and creative thinking, subject-specific pedagogical practices, and the idea of reading and writing to learn, which all are very much priorities within the country. And then also thinking about the ethic of care and how we work with that. So today, what I'll share with you is about one example of work that has been happening on one project within the program, and that's around green economy and entrepreneurship, which was implemented by multi-universities in the country and supported approximately 143 teachers in the period of 2020 and 2021. And a big question in South Africa currently is always the question around assessment. And the big question is always around the idea of higher order questions and assessment. A very common thing that a lot of our reports are showing is that learners struggle sometimes to answer higher order questions. And as a result, it poses challenges to children in the examinations. So now the question we ask ourselves quite often is, so what is higher order questions? And where do higher order questions sometimes sit? So as we move on, I'll share some thoughts on the idea of the higher order questions as we progress. Can move to the next slide. I think to click on all. So very much the idea is that teaching and assessing are two processes that happen simultaneously. It's not about teaching and then thinking about assessing, but very much about teaching and assessing are one part of a process. And so if we're thinking about how we think about learning. And so we also realized that, for example, teaching and assessment is one process. It's not two separate processes that happen and then something happens afterwards and we assess afterwards. It's always a process of teaching and assessing as one. As we teach, we also think about how we're going to assess. So it's one holistic process. We can move on to the next slide. So some of the thoughts around course design is that it's important for us to think about the assessment at the inception of the course design and not as something that comes on later. So some opportunities for significant learning in course design might be at the level of thinking around how assessment happens in terms of dialogues and engagements through multiple methods. It might be perhaps from sharing workplace practices and examples of things that are taking place and the change that is taking place within a workplace, or a change that is taking place in a course that you might be designing, or the way in which you set up your community engagement for your learners. It could possibly be in those spaces. And sometimes it may not, significant learning may not always be clearly visible and requires rethinking assessment practices. So it's very often a question about what kind of a lens do we use when we are trying to set up assessment. What kind of lens do we use in reading our curriculum documents, our policy documents around what we are trying to establish around ESD and also around assessment. So it's very much about what types of lenses we use to interpret this that will influence the way in which we look at the idea of significant learning. It's pretty much about what is the purpose of your assessment. What is the purpose of your assessment will determine how you assess, what you assess, and what you will use for the assessment. And sometimes significant learning may not be as clear in summative assessments, but rather more in terms of formative assessments. But that also depends on what people are valuing as evidence of learning. So, colleagues, those are just some of the questions. So I'd like to now just pose this question. So you can go to the next slide, but if you can click twice. Thank you. So if in place of the idea of significant learning, we use something like climate change, for example. And my question would then be to everyone, so what is it that's important for people to know and do around climate change? You know, different perspectives. Climate change is a very messy and a very complex issue, mainly because it's driven to a large extent by different agendas, by different, framings of the idea of climate change. But if one looks at it, if we only focus on the science knowledge, on the foundational knowledge, and science inquiry, for example, we'd find we would not really be achieving significant learning, because it would be very much around, let's take an example. If we were focusing on a topic like climate change, and we were very much focused on, let's say, a concept like the enhanced greenhouse effect, which would be foundational knowledge, which is required for climate change. understanding. And if we looked at a science inquiry process of how learners are able to apply it, then all we would be doing is achieving the two, the foundational knowledge and the application. But if one then uses the idea of significant learning, because climate change doesn't just, or even any ESD topic we can take, doesn't just require us to know and be able to apply. It requires something that goes beyond just knowing and applying. Climate change knowledge, for example, is very complex knowledge. It is changing rapidly. New science is being produced constantly. So the learning how to learn becomes a very important element of understanding linked to climate change. If we are not assessing this, then it poses challenges for the kind of assessment we are using. Because perhaps, are we able to integrate science knowledge of climate change with other forms of knowledge, with everyday knowledge of climate change? How are we able to do that? And so it leads to the question that if we only focus on foundational knowledge and application without considering the other elements, we have a very skewed sense of information related to a particular topic. So for me, I think what I'm highlighting is the idea that significant learning and assessing for significant learning broadens the idea of what we are teaching, learning, and assessing for. So we can move to the next one. So I'm using a very simple example, and I think it is something that Prof. Eureka has been presenting about. And at a recent conference, particularly, I think it's the Africa Regional Conference for Teacher Competencies and Teacher Education. And this example is quite a useful example in thinking about the idea of significant learning. So we can have significant learning and the thought at a course level. How, if we are teacher educators, how does it filter into our teacher educator courses that we are designing and developing and that we are perhaps running with? Excuse me. But at the same time, it's also linked to at a school level. How does significant learning perhaps happen at a school level? So I want to use an example from recent work we've been doing around green economy and entrepreneurship. So this is a case study where we've developed materials for green economy and entrepreneurship in 2 commerce subjects in South Africa, namely the economic and management sciences and for business studies. Sorry, excuse me. So I'm going to use the example of a grade 7, an example that was shared with us by a school. And the example that I'm sharing is in the South African curriculum for the economic and management sciences in grade 7, there's a school market day. And this school market day requires multiple, so what it does is it's an entrepreneurship day almost, where children plan and then carry out entrepreneurial activities and then they look at how they actually work in integrating different concepts from the commerce subjects into planning and working with this particular day. So it is an example of a project-based teaching and learning activity in grade 7. It is timetabled into the CAPS curriculum, and planning happens over several weeks, and learners participate and follow up, and there's learners plan the event, they participate in the event, and then there's follow up after the event. Some of the learning outcomes involves understanding of economics, business processes, budgeting, accounting, environmental sustainability, communication, and teamwork. So from one of the schools, they highlighted what they do. They decide well in advance when the market day will take place so that the whole school can participate. They plan the event with teachers. The learners make posters and they advertise the event in the community. The learners then produce items that they will sell at this market day. And some of them will do the normal conventional things like baking and selling cakes or for example, selling sweets. But some of them will repurpose, for example, old jeans into environmentally friendly bags. They might grow seeds and make cuttings and grow it into reused tins. Some of them do upcycling. And it's usually things that are found in and around the home. And during the market day, the children actively experience all aspects of commercial activity, the social, the practical, the financial, and they work in teams. Afterwards, after the sales and the day has completed, they tidy up, they clean up the area, they deal with all the garbage, but of course not much might be produced because everything is quite sustainable. They cash up and then the accounting commences. They begin the process of trying to reconcile everything that they've got. So any profit they make then is used to cook a meal at the school, and they invite the elderly and unemployed members of the surrounding community. An assessment takes place around several stages of this curriculum activity. So my question to all of you is, if you've listened, can go to the next slide, to this case study, my question, sorry, the one before this. My question to you would be then, if you think of this example of learning and this project-based activity, or I wouldn't say activity, this project-based learning process, the question would then be, where do you see each one of the activities fitting into the aspects of significant learning? And what I'd like is you're welcome to now add into the chat. Okay, so I think, so I leave you with that question of how is significant learning relating to the different dimensions from the example that I've provided. And then you can go to the next slide. And so this is just some teachers' interpretation and examples of, you know, the question I'd leave you with is, how would you use the idea of significant learning to assess the learning at various stages of the project? Or if, for example, if you were thinking about your topic, whatever your topic might be, whatever your topic is, whether it's around ESD, whether your topic is around, you know, any aspect of ESD, would there be an opportunity for us to think about how we design learning so that it leads to significant learning? And at the same time, thinking about how could that then be assessed? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Shanu for this wonderful experience, for sharing with us all these reflections, all this knowledge. Assessing is an indispensable tool in the process of learning experience, but also within the framework of this sustainability starts with the teacher. So we want to highlight the idea you have brought of relating this teaching and assessing within the framework of the project of change. How to assess within the project changing. So is teaching and assessing two different processes? Are they there to be taken differently? No, we should assess while we are teaching. And it's also so good to understand that the assessment is a very important tool whenever we work, let's say, with the practice, whenever we bring the practice dimension in the process of teaching and learning. This market that you have shared with us, this case study, whereby the children at the primary and the secondary school, they experience the market life at school within the subject, let's say, of business and commerce. It's a very clear example of, let's say, a project of change. So they learn the concepts, they learn the contents, and they play a role as business people. And the profit they use to help people. So we can find the 6 dimensions within this example given within this, let's say, case study. So now we are going to start our session, our question and answer session, and allow me to speak in Portuguese. Vamos agora abrir a sessão de perguntas e respostas. Temos aqui no bate-papo algumas perguntas. Eu falo em português, o Antônio vai agora ajudar a traduzir para o inglês. Mas a primeira pergunta que encontrei aqui no bate-papo foi colocada pelo colega Marcelino, Ele não dirigiu.
Sabino?
Yes,
Sabino.
yes, Heila?
Sorry, can we just check that Antonio is with us for helping us to understand the Portuguese?
Yes,
Antonio?
it is, but I think Sabino should go to the Portuguese platform.
Okay, it's coming through there. Okay, all right.
So
Yeah,
Sabino, if you can press on the Portuguese platform, if you're speaking Portuguese, then
I should press Portuguese platform. Okay.
under interpretation, yes.
Where
Because you're
is
now
it? Let me
talking
just get
Portuguese.
it. Okay, can you please help me?
Am I right, Preven?
Dennis?
And at the moment, Antonio is translating, but he is on the Portuguese channel.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
think Sabino
So
just carry on.
just carry on.
All right.
Carry on, Sabino.
Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
And it's not easy for me to carry the
Go ahead,
No.
go ahead.
No, no,
I can't
Sorry.
even see. All right, thank you. Thank you so
Sabino,
much.
Go
just
ahead.
speak in Portuguese and we know where to follow now. So the English,
Okay.
So
just go onto the Portuguese channel. Yeah.
All right.
just
all right.
just select
Good.
keep your on the Portuguese, and then Antonio will be translating into English on that side for you.
All right. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
I can speak Portuguese.
You
Yes, carry
continue
on.
as normal.
Right,
Thank
thank you, thank you.
Obrigado.
Ok, muito obrigado, pois. Então, eu vou pedir aos colegas, não é, para irem colocando as questões aqui no bate-papo, mas há uma caixa específica, Q&A, temos aqui o Q e A, que é Question and Answer, perguntas e respostas. Aqui é o lugar onde podem colocar as vossas questões. Enquanto isso, eu vou avançar com a leitura das duas questões colocadas pelo colega Marcelino. Acredito que as questões sejam dirigidas à Miss Chanu, uma vez que foi ela que facilitou, não é, a comunicação sobre a avaliação. E passo então a citar. Qual é a extensão, não é, das seis dimensões, até que ponto as 6 dimensões estão relacionadas com a aprendizagem significante ou significativa? Esta é a primeira questão colocada, não é, pelo colega Marcelino. To what extent do the 6 dimensions are interrelated to the significant learning? Não é? Até que ponto as 6 dimensões estão associadas, interrelacionam-se com a aprendizagem significativa ou significante, se preferirem. Depois coloca uma outra questão. Quer saber what's assessing significant learning in the context of terrorism? Okay? O que é avaliar a aprendizagem significante no contexto do terrorismo? Pronto, a pergunta não é, não me parece muito bem no contexto, mas vamos deixar a Miss Chano decidir se quer ou não comentar à volta desta questão. Então, temos essas duas perguntas. Talvez a Miss Chano pode já começar a responder, não é? Enquanto acolhemos outras questões que nos forem colocadas.
All right. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Sim, está.
And I hope I'm able to, okay, I hope you are able to hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Saying that I've got
Yes,
the
we
question
can hear you.
correctly.
We can hear you. That's good. You can.
So I would put the question back, and I'm not sure if we are able to unmute participants.
Good.
But
Hello, Mrs. Shanu, we can't hear you.
so
Yeah, we lost it.
so I would say if
Yes.
Marcelino, listened to the example that I provided,
Good. Yeah.
then perhaps he can provide the answer for us.
Okay.
Because I think it's very much about, if we've listened to the example, can we, for example, see how it applies into the 6 dimensions? So I think I would pose the question back to Marcelino, if he's able to answer it.
So, eu penso que o colega Marcelino podemos convidar o colega Marcelino a tomar a palavra. Ms. Shano, do you think we can invite Marcelino to take the word? Is it, if I have understood?
If I may, I have allowed Marcelino to speak. They can unmute their mic.
Okay, please. Proven, can you please unmute the mic of Marcelino?
We have done so. They just have to click yes. Talking is permitted.
Selena must just unmute and then she can talk.
Hello, Marcelino?
Marcelino, your mic is open. You can go ahead and speak.
Marcelino, a professora Shano recolocou, não é, a questão, diz, a partir daquilo que foi a exposição, a partir dos exemplos que ela deu, não é, ela desafia-o, não é, a pronunciar-se sobre isso, não é, se estivesse na posição, não é, de ter que responder a essa questão, qual seria o seu comentário? Com base na intervenção da professora Shano. Previn, is Marcelino in the line?
Yes, Chair. Marcelino's been allowed to speak, but I think there's a problem with her mic.
All right. Okay. I think we can jump into the next question. I don't know. Mrs. Shan, what do you think? While Marcelino is getting read, we jump into the next question. Do you allow me? Previn, I think we have also lost Miss Shano, isn't it?
The sound is coming in and out on Shanu's side, Chair. I think it's okay to go to the next question.
All right.
Sorry, Prof, before we continue, may we check Professor Shumba's connection? He did say that he's not hearing the discussions.
All right.
Okay.
Prof. Shumba, can you hear us now?
Yes, but it goes on and off.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, sometimes it comes on and then it goes off. I don't know why.
Okay.
But that's okay. Let's continue. Pick it up from there.
Thank you. You may continue, Sabina.
All right, thank you. So, okay, Mrs. Shano, we are jumping to the next question while Marcelino is getting read. And now allow me to read the question of Garcia Duca. A colega Garcia Duca, ou o colega Garcia Duca, coloca a seguinte questão. Gostaria de saber, mas eu acho que também vai acabar no mesmo exercício. Gostaria de saber quais são as 6 dimensões para o desenvolvimento sustentável. Olha, tanto o professor Chumba quanto a Miss Chano, não é? Fizeram referência às 6 dimensões, caro colega. Contudo, eu vou deixar a Miss Chano pronunciar sobre. Miss Chano, Garcia is asking what are the 6 dimensions for the sustainable development.
All right, just to come in, and I hope I've understood everything and I got it all correct. Is if we look at the 6 dimensions, I think some of the colleagues that have put in a comment,
Yes.
where they're saying that the 6 dimensions are interconnected and that it's, you know, that it's, you can't have one without the other.
Shanu? Can you hear us?
Yeah, and if one looks at the example that I provided, it was you can see that in the example that all 6 dimensions came through. For example, the idea of Ubuntu and compassion came through with the idea of using the profit to support the community.
Yes.
And with regards to working with the ones around foundational knowledge, integration and application,
Sorry.
all of it came through in the example of how the concepts and the knowledge was integrated in the learning. Okay, thank you. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, all right. There is one more, Ms. Shanu. Is it possible to have significant learning without taking into consideration, without taking into account the students' needs? That's a question asked by colleague Vasconcelos Chitangeleka. Is it possible to have significant learning without taking into account students' needs?
Maybe Prof. Shumba can also jump in.
Yes, Prof. Shumba can also, it's also related.
Maybe if Prof. Shumba can't come in, then I can also answer Sabino.
Okay,
Yeah.
Prof. Ayla?
Yes, okay.
Good, that's good, yes, thank you.
These are such interesting questions, and
Really?
also to just say a very big thank you to both Overson and Prof. Shumba and Shanu for the wonderful presentations.
Yeah.
You know, I loved Professor Shumba's way of developing the metaphor of the flower with the colleagues in the college there. It's such an interesting metaphor because it's a metaphor that we grow, and we cannot grow in our knowledge or in our sustainability practice unless we connect with the needs of the learners and the people and the community and the environment. So for me, you know, the metaphor of the flower, the assessment flower, it gives us the tools to think about assessment as a very important process of growing and growing together, growing in our learning together with these 6 dimensions, because we need them all to grow in transformative education. So, and we can use this flower in our teacher education practice, as Shanu has shown us, and as the colleagues from the Zambian College showed us. We've also seen teachers using it with children, so it can be used in classrooms. And what it does is it helps us to broaden what it is that we're trying to assess, because mostly the assessment system has helped us only to assess knowledge, which is not always linked to learners' needs. So this tool can give us a way of assessing such that we do take into account both the knowledge that learners need to learn, but also the other dimensions of education, such as, you know, the socio-emotional, such as the connections with our communities, such as the values and ethics that we see in Ubuntu, and of course also our capacity then to learn more. So it's a very, very significant model, I think, and it's got
Yes.
much potential for transformative education. So I would encourage colleagues to work with it, to try it out, to, you know, really think about assessment as a process of growing rather than a process of judgment, because the whole history of assessment has been a history of judgment. It judges to exclude rather than assesses to help us grow. So that's a long answer, Sabino, but perhaps also a good summary of the session. So if colleagues are happy, we can, you know, say a very big thank you to our panelists today.
All right.
And I would really like to encourage Shanu and Overson to write a paper on that work. It's so interesting, and to share that back into this community.
Yeah.
Those 2 examples were wonderful.
Yes, supported.
Supported.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sabino.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Claire.
everyone. See you tomorrow.
Okay,
Thanks
see
a
you.
lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Muchas obrigado, Sabino.
Muito obrigado, professora Ayla. Tchau.
Abraço.
Outro abraço. Colega Guiar Baqueto.
Oh, tão longe, tão perto.
É verdade.